Hello and welcome to our section about circles. So circles are pretty standard. You've learned about circles before. You've learned how to, graph them and do stuff like that. But now we're going to look at them in a different way based on the equation. And our real goal is to find HK, which is the center. So this is our center. And then R, which is the radius, and has been the radius for a very, very long time. So whenever they give you a center and a radius, we're using this formula. This is standard form. Okay? This is standard form. That's what it is. X minus h squared plus y minus k squared equals r squared, where hk is your center and r is your radius. So it's very simple then to take our center and our radius and plug it in. So let's do example 1. Well, we have x minus h, and remember that your center is hk. Okay, so that's our h and that's our k, which means we're plugging it in where we see to plug it in. So we need to plug in the 3 for our h, and for the k we have a -2. And that equals r, which is 3, because they give it to us, squared. So now all we have to do is simplify. Well, a -3 is just -3, so we can leave that as -3 squared. But a negative right here becomes a positive. So we need that to be y plus 2 squared. And then really there's no reason to ever leave 3 squared as 3 squared, because you know that 3 squared is just 9. And that's it. That's our answer. So we just plugged in h and k and plugged in r and simplified. So now what do we do if they give us an equation? Well, you figure out what your h and k are and your r based on their location. So we know that it's x minus h squared plus y minus k squared equals r squared, which means that's our h, that's our k, and that the square root of that is our r. But inside, the 4 and the 2 are inside, and inside you always do the inverse, which means that our c is actually not +4, it's -4, comma, and instead of -2, it's +2. Then, to get our r, 36 is equal to r squared. So how do you get rid of a square? Well, you square root it. And the square root of 36 is 6. So r is 6. Now, normally I tell you when you take the square root, you have to do the positive and the negative. But because our radius is never going to be a negative number, you don't have to worry about that negative here. Alright, so now we need to graph this equation. So the first thing we need to do is find our center and find our radius. So our center here is the inverse of -3. So we have 3. And then the inverse of +1, which is -1. So we need to go plot that. We have 3, -1 right here. Our radius is that square root of 4. Well, the square root of 4 is 2, which means that in every direction we're moving 2. So we need to have a dot here, a dot here, a dot here, a dot here. And then we connect those dots. And I'm not an artist. My pictures are not perfect. So yep, I don't actually know how to use that tool, which means we're drawing it, and it's going to look ugly. And there's your circle. Okay? Because you get the gist of where it is. So hopefully that makes sense to you. Now, we need to go back in time to where we used completing the square. Because, for example, 4, we have to write the equation in standard form using completing the square, because that's really the only way you're going to be able to do it. So when you complete the square, you half it, you square it, and you add it to both sides. You half it, you square it, and you add it to both sides. Okay, that's the little jingle that I told my class. Now remember, when you're halving something, it's the b that you are halving. That's why that b is in parentheses right there. Okay, because we're talking about that b. So basically, you have this formula that's at the top of your screen. Okay, x squared plus bx plus b over 2 squared, that becomes x plus b over 2, in parentheses, squared. So let's go through this process, and maybe that'll jog your memory about how to complete the square. Well, the first thing we want to do whenever we're solving or rewriting these is to reorder. Because if you look at your equation, you have x squared, y squared, 6x, 2y, and then a 9. And we want to get all of our common variables together. So I'm going to circle my x's and box my y's, because those need to be right next to each other. Then I need to move that 9 over. So because it's positive, we're going to subtract 9 from both sides. So let's reorder, and I'm going to add spaces so that we can fill in the blank whenever we complete the square. Okay, because that's really what we need to do. So I'm going to put my x's in a parentheses by themselves. We have x squared plus 6x, and then I'm going to leave a blank there. Okay, so those are my x's. Then my y's. So we have y squared minus 2y, and again plus a blank, and that equals negative 9 because those canceled and we got negative 9 on the right hand side. But when you half it and square it, you have to add it to both sides. So we need a plus orange for our x's and a plus red space for our y's, so that when we fill in those blanks, we add them to both sides. Okay? So we half it. Well, 6 divided by 2 is 3, and then we square it, which is 9. Okay, so what's going to go in the blank is a 9. So you have a 9 here, but then we also have to do it to the other side. There's a 9 there. Negative 2. Well, half of negative 2, so we need to divide it by 2. That's negative 1. And squared is just a positive 1. So we have a 1 there and a 1 there. Okay, so we have completed the square. That was step 2. Step 3 is to factor. So you remember this equation that's up here? This x plus b over 2 squared? That's what we're getting at. Okay, so we found b over 2 for both of them, right? So we should end up with x plus, and then 6 over 2 was just the 3. So we have a 3 there. And then our y. So we have y, and then our b over 2 over here, the negative 2 over 2 was the negative 1. So we have minus 1 squared. And that equals, well, we have negative 9 plus 9, those cancel, and then we have a 1. So that equals 1. So if I asked you to rewrite it in standard form, now we can find our center and our radius. So our center here, which is good practice anyway, inside inverse, so we have negative 3 and positive 1, and our radius is the square root of 1, which is just 1. And then we could graph it even if we wanted to. Okay? So let's go through that process one more time. Turn your paper over, if you have paper, and we're going to do the exact same thing again. So we need to circle our x's and box our y's. So I have x squared, I have a 2x, and then our y's are the y squared minus 4y. And then again, I need to move that 11 over, so I'm going to add 11 to both sides. And then we're going to write what we have. So we have in parentheses x squared plus 2x plus a blank, because we need to fill in the space. Then we have our y's, so we have y squared minus 4y plus a blank, because again we need to fill in the space. And that equals, those cancel, and we get 11. Well, we get 11 plus our orange blank, and then plus our red blank. Okay, because when we added it to one side, we have to add it to the other. Now, remember, it's b over, you half it, You square it and you add it to both sides. So we're having 2 in our orange. So we have 2 over 2, which is 1, and 1 squared is still 1. So we have a 1 here and a 1 here. Then we have negative 4 over 2, because that's that b. Well, that is negative 2 squared is 4. So we have a 4 here and a 4 here. Now we have to factor. So when we factor, we get x plus just b over 2. Well, in the orange, our 2 over 2 is 1, so we have x plus 1. Same thing for the red. We have y plus b over 2. Well, our b over 2 was negative 2, so we have y minus 2. And that equals 11 plus 1 plus 4, which is 16. So if you wanted to find this center and radius, you'd have negative 1, 2, and the radius is the square root of 16, which is 4. And that's it. Have a great day.